it's almost lunch, and a hungry crowd is a motivated crowd. When I saw the tent city for the first time, I couldn't believe my eyes. Let's talk a little about poverty and homelessness. Destitution is an unsafe place. In the photograph, what do you see? Do you see a beautiful black and white? Maybe you see something terrible. Perhaps you see a man with potential. When he saw me walking up for the first time, I'm sure he thought that I was homeless too. I get that sometimes. But my pride blurred my vision. He could tell that I was cold. It was freezing, it was snowing, the wind was blowing, I had no gloves, my hands hurt. And he invited me with a smile to get warm by his fire. He offered a coffee, and of course, I said yes. I love coffee. I love coffee. But where are we going to get locally brewed coffee under a bridge? He returned to his tent, and he came back with a sock, and he put coffee in it and set it in a kettle on the lower coals of the fire. And we drank coffee together, and he shared with me his story. Stories are important. The stories we share with each other and the roles we play in one another's stories, they matter. Had I not allowed him to do this for me, we may never have known each other as people. And I also learned that sometimes we should allow people to help us even when we don't think we need it. It opens doors. At this point, my paradigms were shattered. His story included very difficult things. He needed dental work, and the smile he was giving me was hiding pain. He was wearing wet shoes that were 2 sizes too small. And on a visit, I found him in his tent, unable to walk. The small shoes had injured his feet, and they were infected from being wet. There are no wet shelters in Greenville. His mother was very sick. He had no way to visit her. And then she passed away, and he couldn't get to the funeral. He had no heat in his tent, was fighting a cold, and my problem seemed so ridiculous. He was kind, articulate, and he never asked me for a red cent. And I thought, why are you here instead of a shelter? And like many, I started to problem solve. I wanted to fix it. But as you can imagine, that didn't work out so well. My initial ideas were like small Band-Aids for bleeding wounds that needed stitches. Or maybe like trying to catch a wave with a bucket without getting wet. There are problems with individuals giving. Where they are and where they need to be is more like a journey. But I couldn't walk away. I mean, how do you walk away when people are hurting? So I started to research the issues and doing some fact-checking. And a shelter worker may have said it best when we were in a meeting. He said, Patrick, it kind of works like this. I offered you something to drink, but you had to reach out and take it. In other words, you can't force assistance. Which brought me to a provoking reality. It's either coffee and a sock, or you can drink the Kool-Aid. You can do it yourself, or you can drink what's being offered to you and consume everything that comes with it. Much organized help comes with conditions, and conditional giving introduces challenge. Shelters are types of institutions with unlocked doors. Each shelter establishes their best practice, the rules for operating the business. And the rules by nature narrow to a more targeted audience. There are things like mandatory church service. You can't come and go as you want. There are rules to protect safety, to prevent substance abuse. Some married couples are required to separate to different shelters because there are not accommodations. They're a lesser priority than larger family units. And these rules and others just aren't right for everyone. Keeping the population balanced can also be tricky. In shelters, if there are too many with a certain kind of problem, the environment suffers and can be unsafe. There are almost always a capacity overflowing to the street. Not all can get in, and not all want in. Christian organizations seem to do the majority of the work, likely because the return on investment is spiritual. They offer wonderful things like food, warmth, and shelter, and some medical care. And then there's cold shelters, very important. They're primarily meant for nighttime, and the homeless call it the freeze tank. But during the day, it's a little different. For 2 winters, I've been calling the major shelters on the below freezing and bad weather days, and most of them have been full or closed. So we understand that there are capacity issues, and I also didn't fully understand how they operate. Some shelters send the homeless into the cold even when they have pneumonia. But they aren't a hospital, and it's outside the scope of how they've decided they can help. Do you see the disconnect? There are gaps. Many homeless are on the street, either not willing or able to drink the Kool-Aid, so it's coffee and a sock, and America's streets are full. We'll talk someone off a ledge about to jump, no matter what they've done. We will give a confessed murderer room and board for the rest of their life. We'll even risk our lives to save a mountain climber reaching for a Darwin Award. But not these. Not these who fall from our social cliff. In shelters, there are signs and behavior which demonstrate the captor and captive relationship. And it's perhaps unavoidable due to the behavior issues and the design controls. It seems to be in the nature of the arrangement. Shelters, foster homes, mental institutions, and some nursing homes have similarities when dealing with people who are in need. Perhaps that's why government's trying to make homelessness illegal. The violation would allow for control. It's difficult to determine whether the institutions provide true solutions. Sometimes they're more like warehouses than manufacturing facilities. Let's consider for a moment a no work, no eat scenario for the able, which could reintroduce dignity. Many Christians have recited the verse to me where it says, Jesus says that there will always be poor among us, and it holds true. But later in the New Testament, it says, if a man doesn't work, neither should he eat. Remember, a hungry crowd is a motivated crowd. And our assistance, as much as it is compassionate, at times seems to work in an opposite fashion. Sometimes it's expectation rather than something else. It's a demotivator. They show signs of entitlement, some of them due to nonprofit resources. They're ungrateful. But some are grateful. It's just not even. If we can find ways to help them earn a bed or earn a meal in advance, would it restore dignity, work ethic, and benefit all? Many homeless say they don't want a handout. What if we developed microjob systems for our downtown with small tasks to help them earn room and board, educational credits, promote incentives to stay clean? The work options are not adequate, and we must develop worthy things for them to do. Less than 1/3 of the homeless make an attempt to work. If they're lucky, they find a day labor job twice per week at $50 per day. If they're working, the shelters charge $56. If not working, it can be free. This leaves them $44 per week to live. You see, the motivation to work is low due to the work versus reward ratios. Those in sub-poverty and the homeless are paid well to donate plasma. Yes, the homeless donate plasma. Perhaps we can create an environment which would allow them to be better donors. Would this fact add value to their souls? Society's perceptions are a factor. Homeless can't prevent society from seeing them in a humiliating condition, and how we view them is also a reason why they're stuck. In society, we see them as unified. All homeless are the same, but rather they are heterogeneous, unique, and full of potential. Yes, some really do need to get a job. And some of the addicts need to stop making signs. They make about $100 an hour on a good corner. But not all are like this. Once they're in the homeless cycle, it's difficult to compensate for the losses, to overcome financial circumstances, hospital bills kept as tax liens, falling behind on culture, education, family life, work advancement. the social cliff that they cannot recover from. The streets aren't safe. Often they're assaulted by gangs during initiations. Tent cities can be violent because of crime, the addicts, and the mentally ill. Protecting possessions is a daily struggle. Tents don't lock. So if they go to the cold shelter, their belongings might not be there when they return. Public transportation systems are inadequate. The buses just don't go where they need for them to go. Understanding the need for emotional support is also key. Please consider that their intellect has been shifted out of alignment, and when options narrow, reality changes. And this emotional state contributes to many of the mental illnesses. Many have lost trust in self and trust in society, the hope that a positive future is possible. They've lost their sense in social connection and sense of belonging, which is perhaps why there are tent cities to foster connection and network. Many have lost their identity. Who am I, and how do I contribute? Loss of job, divorce, even something as small as losing a driver's license can start a chain reaction. Some have left neglect and abuse situations. There are addiction problems, foster children who age out and they're unprepared, felons who have served time and can't find a job, and veterans who have seen terrible things at war that can't acclimate themselves back to society. Most suffer from depression. It's difficult to live in a tent or a car. The longer they're on the street, the harder it is for them to recover. Many use substances to numb the negative emotions they feel, and this develops dependency, fosters poor choices, and is damaging to the intellect. Handling emotion in America is not something that we actively teach in our mainstream. Until things go wrong and someone says, you need to see a therapist, the emotional part is very difficult to repair. And all the symptoms seem to point back to the need to strengthen the home and the family unit. Doing this would provide better raw materials for life. There are millions of single parents with children struggling to make ends meet, and many of those children suffer the consequences of being left unprepared. Mental illness is an epidemic since the closing of asylums and deinstitutionalization. From Ronald Reagan back to the 1950s, the funding is now gone, and you'll find many mentally ill on the streets. Poverty, homelessness, and mental illness are connected, and when options narrow, reality changes. For a moment, I'd like for you to consider the origin of poverty. Is poverty inside a person, or is it external? We say, let me treat the poverty inside you with drugs or therapy or retreat symptoms, rather than looking out and pointing to its origin and environment. Rather than figuring out how to warehouse them and keep them alive, why can't we find ways to help them live? Are we the land of opportunity for the poor? I remember a promise our country made to the world. It's on the Statue of Liberty. The poet Lazarus called Lady Liberty, Mother of Exiles. She wrote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed to me." America invited the world's homeless to be a part of our big idea. Was poverty inside those people that made the trip to America, or was it the environment they came from? Today, our homeless are in the millions, and our asylums are now the streets and full of cruelty. How we choose to treat people in need defines who we are. What would happen if we gave a group of homeless people some land far away from our society and our resources, which keep them dependent and stuck, away from the drugs, and said, here, take care of this land, and if you do a good job, it's yours for the rest of your life? Think about the daily chore of living off the land. Isn't that what happened in our eastern shores hundreds of years ago? A change in environment. I couldn't walk away because we're connected like a chain that is defined by its weakest links, and it tells our story. The homeless tell the story about our society, and every problem found under a bridge can be found in the richest neighborhoods where money pays for indiscretions to go away, and we have doors to hide behind. The original tent city, there was a black side and a white side. what does that teach us about ourselves? Is racism a pigment of the imagination? We must not drink the bitter cup of blame and excuse and indifference, nor should we force anyone to drink our religious preferences, realizing that helping them will help us to better understand ourselves. I couldn't walk away knowing that they might freeze to death. I couldn't walk away because their soul weighs no less than mine. And I couldn't walk away because we're connected. When the tent city closed, they offered existing options: bus tickets out of town or move your tent. And many are now just across the street, and people are going homeless daily. Look at the photographs. What do you see? Do you see something great? Did you see something terrible? Or did you see people hungry for a new environment? I love coffee, and it brings us together to share our stories. I appreciate your time. Thank you.